Hegel opens the philosophy of right with the image of a seed, a beginning that already contains its end, not as a blueprint imposed from outside, but as an inner drive toward its own completion. The concept of right for Hegel is that seed, freedom trying to become actual. And the development of right is not a procedure mechanically imposed onto history. It is what emerges when a historical world becomes answerable to its own contradictions. Greek ethical life, Roman law, Christian inwardness, modern civil society. Each stage transforms because something inside it can no longer sustain itself. But the folk reading of Hegel, including the folk reading still common today, says something much simpler. This is just power. European modernity declaring itself the destination of history after already winning the battle. Neutrality becomes impossible because every vocabulary already belongs to a victor. And Hegel's response is not to deny power. That would be too easy. His response is to follow the accusation all the way to its conclusion. If power is truly the engine of this development, then power should be transferable. Abstract the mechanism, move it elsewhere, run it again. Take medieval China. Try to reproduce Europe there. Try to generate the same historical movement artificially, the same crises, the same institutional pressures, the same developmental trajectory. And what happens? Not simple failure, something worse. You merely generate another history of power, another succession, another vocabulary declaring itself necessary after the fact. And this is where the problem appears, because once power becomes the only explanatory category, every civilization becomes interchangeable in kind. One empire replaces another. One symbolic order succeeds another. One dominant vocabulary absorbs the previous one. But then the distinction between development and repetition disappears entirely. Power can explain conquest. It can explain administration, continuity, expansion, institutional persistence. But it cannot explain why one historical sequence becomes intelligible as development, while another remains mere succession. It cannot explain why certain forms collapse from within while others survive their own contradictions. Rome's slavery generated contradictions that destabilized themselves. Rome's property law generated structures that endured. Power reads both the same way. The concept does not. The concept reads history as a self-conscious gradient. And this gradient is the thing that cannot be transplanted. Not Greek ethics as content, not Roman law as content, not Christianity as content, but the fact that each stage understands itself as resolving something the previous stage could no longer sustain. That registration accumulates. History becomes conscious of its own movement. And this is what Hegel means by rational development. Not innocence from power, not neutrality floating above history, but a form of life becoming answerable to itself. The strongest Hegelian lesson is therefore not that he refutes the folk picture by denying domination. It is that he changes the criterion for explanation itself. The folk picture says Behind every universal claim lies victorious power. History is written by winners. Reason is retrospective rhetoric attached to successful domination. And Hegel's answer is devastatingly subtle. He asks, what would power itself need in order to explain development? And the answer is more than power. Because power alone cannot account for conceptual self-revision. It cannot explain why institutions begin generating standards capable of turning against themselves, why freedom becomes a problem for systems built without it, why law exposes contradictions inside law, why a civilization becomes intelligible to itself through its failures. The moment reason reduces itself entirely to domination, it loses the ability to distinguish necessity from succession. And once that distinction collapses, critique collapses with it, because critique already presupposes that some transformations are more than replacements, that history sometimes learns, that some developments are not merely victorious, but internally compelled. And this is why the seed matters, not because history follows a rigid blueprint, but because the movement carries within itself an awareness of what it is becoming, a self-conscious gradient, one that cannot simply be exported, colonized, or mechanically reproduced elsewhere. Because the gradient is not the content, it is the historical movement becoming legible to itself from within.